Different ancient traditions look completely unrelated when you study them on the surface. From the Gnostic sects, hidden deep within the scorching Egyptian deserts, to the isolated Essene communities living near the shores of the Dead Sea, and stretching all the way to the indigenous Native American tribes navigating the vast, sweeping plains of a different continent. They were separated by oceans, thousands of miles, and hundreds of years of human history. Yet, an undeniable and highly specific pattern repeats across all of their historical records. They all utilized three very specific plants, not for culinary purposes, not for basic medicine, and certainly not for mere aesthetic decoration. They used them as sophisticated biological frequency shields. It was not primitive magic. It was not a secret dogmatic ritual reserved for a chosen few. It was something much simpler and, at the same time, profoundly more disruptive to the systems of psychological control. It was the absolute ability to influence physical reality itself through the conscious, structural application of natural resonance. Those who mastered this particular skill understood a fundamental truth that modern quantum physics is only just beginning to mathematically prove. They understood that the surrounding environment is not just empty space filled with dead air. It is a highly sensitive, conductive medium. It is a subtle reflection that absorbs, holds, and exponentially amplifies the energetic residue of absolutely everything that happens within it. To understand exactly why this highly specific pattern of three plants repeats across entirely disconnected ancient cultures, we must first clearly define what these ancient masters were actually shielding their homes and their minds from. The ancient texts discovered hidden in jars in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, back in 1945, speak extensively and explicitly of forces they identified as Archons. For centuries, conventional, institutionalized religious organizations completely mistranslated and weaponized this concept, turning it into literal, physical demons or monstrous entities to frighten the masses into obedience. However, a closer, more sophisticated reading of the original texts reveals something entirely different, something much closer to what modern neuroscientists and quantum physicists might describe as parasitic frequencies, thought forms, or mimetic psychological viruses. These forces do not have direct physical power over human beings. They cannot force your hand. Instead, they operate entirely through subtle environmental manipulation and frequency interference. They are the invisible, heavy tension you physically feel when you walk into a room where a bitter argument just took place, even if the room is now completely empty. They are the sudden, crushing wave of anxiety that hits your nervous system out of nowhere at 3 in the morning when the world is completely quiet. They are that paralyzing, irrational sense of self-doubt that suddenly clouds your mind and drains your motivation just as you are about to make a positive, transformative life change. These heavy, disruptive feelings are not always your own organic thoughts. Very often, they are physical manifestations of interfering environmental frequencies that literally drain your cellular, vital energy. Think of it like walking through a space highly saturated with invisible Wi-Fi or radio waves. You cannot see the waves, but they carry heavy data that interacts with your own biological receiver. The ancient masters realized that human consciousness, particularly the central nervous system, is highly susceptible to these invisible currents. They understood that prolonged exposure to these chaotic frequencies keeps the human brain trapped in a state of chronic sympathetic nervous system arousal, the constant, exhausting state of fight or flight. But these ancient scientists also made a groundbreaking observation about the natural world. They discovered that certain living elements in nature, specifically certain plants, naturally emit biological electromagnetic frequencies that completely disrupt and neutralize these negative transmissions. Every living element in nature possesses a specific energetic signature, an electromagnetic field generated by its cellular biological processes. By bringing specific living plants into their immediate physical space, ancient people were essentially installing natural, biological frequency jammers. This was a highly advanced, sophisticated system of environmental protection, and it relied heavily on a very specific trinity of botanical life to cover the entire spectrum of psychological interference. Let us look closely at how the components of this pattern unfold. The first critical element of this ancient botanical trinity is hyssop. Historically categorized as Hyssopus officinalis, this incredibly resilient plant is mentioned repeatedly, almost obsessively, in ancient Mediterranean and Middle Eastern texts as a primary instrument of deep purification. But the ancient masters did not view purification as a mere symbolic act or a metaphorical cleansing. They viewed it as a precise, mechanical process of frequency adjustment. Hyssop operates by emitting a constant, incredibly steady, low-grade vibrational wave that specifically targets, intercepts, and disrupts the lowest band of negative energies. This specific frequency band is the one responsible for triggering the primal, reptilian part of the human brain. It is the frequency of irrational fear, of heavy, paralyzing anxiety without any apparent logical cause, and that lingering, exhausting feeling of invisible threat that keeps our nervous system in a constant, highly alert state. Initiatory communities, like the Essenes, who were widely known for their advanced esoteric and scientific knowledge, meticulously kept living hyssop plants directly at the entrance of their dwellings. This was not a landscaping or decorative choice. It was a highly calculated, strategic first line of energetic defense. By keeping this specific plant near the main physical entry points of a home, an invisible but very real vibrational barrier is established. This barrier functions much like an acoustic soundproofing material, absorbing and scrambling denser, more disturbing frequencies, making it incredibly difficult for that heavy energy to penetrate the inner sanctuary of the living space. The second crucial element in this recurring historical pattern is cedar, specifically ancient varieties like Cedrus. In almost all ancient traditions, cedar was immensely valued, not just for its physical durability, its resistance to rot, or its incredibly aromatic wood, but for its extraordinary energetic and acoustic architecture. While hyssop acts as a heavy, grounding blocker specifically tuned for frequencies of fear, cedar serves an entirely different, higher-level cognitive function. It naturally neutralizes the specific frequencies of mental confusion and psychological static. It directly tackles that heavy state of mental dispersion that prevents us from maintaining sharp clarity, the kind of thick psychological fog that makes us easily forget our highest personal purposes and keeps us completely trapped in endless, exhausting loops of circular, unproductive thinking. Cedar essentially acts as a highly tuned biological antenna, naturally resonating at much higher frequencies of consciousness and cognitive organization. Its physical presence in an enclosed room stabilizes the erratic, chaotic energy of scattered thoughts. This is precisely why ancient wisdom schools and temple builders specifically utilized cedar wood and living cedar plants in spaces designated for deep, focused meditation, and most importantly, in sleeping quarters. When the human body goes to sleep, our conscious, analytical mind completely powers down. The logical firewall drops, making our subconscious incredibly receptive and highly vulnerable to subtle environmental influences that can deeply distort our perception, hijack our dreams, and drain our vital energy before the new day even begins. Cedar acts as a stabilizing, protective anchor for the vulnerable mind while the physical body rests and repairs itself. The third, and perhaps the most complex, dynamic element of this ancestral pattern is white sage, scientifically known as Salvia apiana, revered extensively by Native American peoples as the absolute foundational plant for profound spatial clearing. White sage possesses a highly unique, deeply fascinating vibrational characteristic that sets it apart from almost all other flora. Unlike hyssop and cedar, which tend to operate at relatively fixed, highly stable frequencies to block specific negative bands, white sage does not remain energetically static. Through its biological field, it actually pulsates throughout a massive, wide range of the energy spectrum, creating a highly dynamic, constantly shifting, and incredibly adaptive protective field. If hyssop is a specialized heavy-duty filter and cedar is a stabilizing high-frequency antenna, white sage is a complex, constantly fluctuating biological shield. It pulses at irregular, naturally occurring frequencies that make it practically impossible for complex, adaptable negative energies to ever settle, harmonize, or take root in a space. It functions remarkably like a highly sophisticated, modern, encrypted security system that constantly, randomly changes its own access codes every few seconds, completely rendering the environment impenetrable to any hostile hacking energetic interference. Understanding the highly unique biological and energetic properties of these three specific plants logically leads us to the core mechanism of how they were actually utilized as a unified system. Why does this exact combination work so incredibly effectively? And how did ancient people actively engage them without relying on blind faith or empty superstition? The secret mechanism lies in a concept we now understand in modern physics and architecture as spatial triangulation, directly combined with the advanced physics of bioacoustic resonance. The effectiveness of these living plants absolutely does not depend on you believing in them. That is the fundamental difference between ancient science and modern superstition. Just as a physical magnet does not require your personal belief or faith to attract a piece of iron, these living plants organically alter the electromagnetic and subtle energy fields of a room simply by existing and undergoing their natural, constant biological processes. However, to maximize this powerful effect and create an actual shield, the ancient masters understood that the plants must be positioned to form a specific geometric relationship within the three-dimensional living space. This mechanism of protection is entirely structural and geographic. Hyssop is always placed near the main entrance or the primary doorways, firmly securing the main physical and energetic threshold where the external chaos of the world first attempts to enter the home. Cedar is intentionally positioned deep within the bedroom, establishing a highly secure, high-frequency perimeter specifically around the sleeping area, where human consciousness is at its most receptive, open, and vulnerable state. Finally, the white sage is placed directly in the center of the home, acting as the absolute energetic heart and the primary oscillating engine of the space. From this central, pivotal point, its dynamic, constantly pulsating frequency radiates outward in a spherical pattern, geometrically intersecting and weaving together with the stable fields generated by the hyssop at the door and the cedar in the bedroom. This precise physical triangulation creates a highly coherent, intersecting grid of biological frequencies, a literal standing wave of energy that covers and saturates the entire living space, leaving no energetic dead zones for negative resonance to hide. But there is a second, absolutely critical part of this structural mechanism that truly locks the system into place, and it involves human vocal intention. Ancient texts heavily emphasize that the physical placement of the plants is only the necessary baseline. The true final activation of this protective field requires the spoken word. This is a point where many modern interpretations completely fail, because they confuse intention with prayer. This is not about praying or pleading as a victim for some external, distant force to come down and save you. It is about deeply understanding the literal physics of sound and cymatics. The human vocal cords are a phenomenally powerful biological acoustic instrument. They are capable of producing physical, measurable sound waves that travel through the air, directly altering local air pressure and interacting instantaneously with the surrounding electromagnetic environment. When a person stands in the center of their home and loudly, clearly, and confidently states their intention to claim, purify, and protect their own space, they are doing something highly mechanical. The physical, acoustic vibration of the human voice literally interacts with the biological frequencies currently being emitted by the plants. You are essentially using the physical vibration of your vocal cords to synthesize, harmonize, and lock the botanical grid into a permanent state of resonance. You are not begging for safety from the dark. You are audibly, physically acknowledging your own inherent sovereign power to shape your own energetic reality, merging the physical vibration of your biology with the natural defenses of the earth. When this ancient logic of definition, structural comparison, and physical mechanism is successfully applied in a modern home, the resulting effects on the human psychological and physical experience are profound, immediate, and highly measurable. The very first, most undeniable effect you will notice is a fundamental, almost shocking change in the actual quality of the silence within your home. It is not necessarily that the physical background noise of the city stops, but the space itself suddenly feels incredibly lighter, vastly clearer, and remarkably expansive, as if a thick, heavy layer of invisible, suffocating static has been permanently wiped clean from the air. Shortly after this shift in the atmosphere, a massive, significant change in your biological sleep patterns will absolutely occur. Without the constant, exhausting, invisible bombardment of disruptive environmental frequencies, your central nervous system can finally drop its defenses and achieve deep, restorative, delta wave rest. You will wake up actually feeling physically and mentally recovered, completely leaving behind that strange, heavy, residual exhaustion that constantly plagues so many people living in modern, energetically polluted environments. Furthermore, as the days pass within this triangulated space, a profound emotional stabilization takes root in your daily life. External situations, demanding people, and daily triggers that would normally provoke intense anxiety, sudden flashes of anger, or deep, paralyzing stress begin to rapidly lose their energetic grip on your mind. You start to view these daily challenges with a strange, detached, and highly elevated clarity. You find yourself naturally responding thoughtfully and strategically to your environment, rather than reacting blindly and emotionally to invisible external pressures. However, there is one highly specific psychological effect that almost always occurs, and you must be thoroughly prepared for it when you implement this system. Usually, just as the home environment begins to feel truly clear, peaceful, and elevated, a sudden, incredibly sharp thought will aggressively enter your mind. A very specific thought that says, "This is absolutely ridiculous. Nothing has actually changed at all. I am just making this up. I am just imagining all of this peace." This exact moment is the ultimate, undeniable proof of the mechanism actively working. That thought of deep, sudden doubt is not your own organic thought. It is the final, desperate resistance. It is the absolute last attempt by the chaotic, parasitic frequencies to reestablish their crumbling influence over your perception before the biological shield becomes fully, permanently integrated into the space. When that specific thought of intense doubt arises, you simply observe it. Clearly recognize it as external mechanical interference trying to find a back door into your mind, and you calmly let it pass. This highly advanced knowledge of biological frequency shielding was systematically and deliberately removed from mainstream human education for a very specific reason. Because it grants the individual complete, unbreakable psychological and spatial autonomy. The person who deeply understands how to utilize the natural structural mechanisms of the earth to permanently secure their own mind and their own home absolutely does not need a massive institution to mediate their reality, tell them how to think, or sell them a cure for their anxiety. They become completely sovereign. The strategic triangulated use of hyssop, cedar, and white sage represents a highly advanced, ancient architectural technology that humanity is only just beginning to scientifically rediscover. It is a reminder that the environment around us is alive, and we have the profound ability to tune it. If you have ever experimented with the spatial placement of specific living plants to actively alter the feeling, the energy, or the acoustic resonance of a room, I encourage you to share your detailed observations below. What specific, measurable changes did you notice in your own environment and your own state of mind when you altered the biological frequency of your space?